4KidsEntertainment was one of the most significant companies in the mainstreaming of anime in North America. I say was because they no longer exist. Despite having a lucrative business plan and huge financial windfalls in the 1990s and 2000s, 4KidsEntertainment died a slow death between 2008 and 2011. How one of the fastest rising entertainment brands of the millennium ended up in bankruptcy a mere decade later is already a very interesting story, but that's not really how people talk about it. There are hundreds of videos on YouTube talking about 4Kids, either why people hate them or why they were good, actually. You see, for older Zoomers and millennials like myself, the name 4Kids draws up a bunch of conflicting images. What usually gets lost in fandom wars is what 4Kids did as a business. That's what this video is about. What this video isn't going to do is accuse or excuse 4Kids for its notorious localization practices. That discourse has been run into the ground for going on 3 decades now, and quite frankly, it's immaterial to the bottom line. My goal is just to explain what happened, what went well and what went wrong, not to play armchair quarterback. There is no one vital turning point that signaled the end of 4Kids. As we'll see, 4Kids' bankruptcy was caused by a confluence of cultural, economic, and structural trends coupled with some very bad decisions by its CEO, the modern anime fan's personal Hitler, Alfred R. Kahn. For many of you, this will be a fun trip down memory lane, and even for those who have no nostalgia for 4Kids, it should be a good lesson in the history of anime in North America, albeit one often detached from the rest of the industry. There will be a lot of smoke and jargon while we walk, but once we air things out a bit, it should be educational for everyone. Even though 4Kids' eventual rise to and fall from the top of the American anime industry is entrenched in the economics of, and ultimately affected by the trends of, the American anime industry, I think it's important to remind people that 4Kids wasn't an anime business. It was, first and foremost, a licensing business. 4Kids in some form goes back to 1970, when it was founded under the name Leisure Concepts. But the business that we actually care about began in 1991. That was the year that the company named Alfred R. Kahn as its newly minted CEO. A Brooklyn-born former military man, Kahn got his start in the advertising business at the Consumers Distributing Company, a Canadian-based catalog sales company. In 1977, Kahn joined Coleco Industries as a sales manager. Kahn became a senior vice president of marketing in 1983, around the same time that he discovered a new toy concept that made Coleco a fortune.
The Cabbage Patch Kids are dolls about 16 inches high. They don't walk, talk, wet their pants, or grow hair. They don't do much of anything. But they have upset the supply and demand cycle to an astonishing degree. There has never been such a first-year demand for a new doll.
As far as I'm concerned, they're the worst-looking things I've ever seen.
Over the next few years, Coleco made some bad decisions that turned its success into a bankruptcy, the details of which we won't go into, but which we'll probably see some portents of later. During his time at Coleco, Kahn made contacts with Nintendo, a Japanese gaming company that was still just taking root in North America. In 1987, the year before Coleco filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, Kahn found his way to Leisure Concepts, where he immediately went to work signing Nintendo as a prominent licensee. Kahn became vice chairman of Leisure Concepts' board of directors with an intent to buy out the company from its then president Stanley A. Weston. A self-styled inventor, it's hard to name a product that Kahn actually invented, but he had a clear talent for market research. More importantly, he had a vision for where he wanted the company to go. When it was first founded, Leisure Concepts was an intermediary licensing agent between copyright holders and marketing, manufacturing, and distribution firms. To give an example of what they did, let's use Kahn's signing of Nintendo. Nintendo wanted to market and commercialize their character properties more effectively in North America, so they hired Leisure Concepts to negotiate contracts with toy makers like Mattel and distributors like Walmart to make and sell merchandise. If you're wondering why Nintendo couldn't just do that themselves, well, I don't know. But the market advantage of outsourcing is expertise. Leisure Concepts had a proven track record and connections to toy companies that Nintendo didn't. If Nintendo wanted Donkey Kong toys made by Mattel put into Walmart, this was a better arrangement than hiring a whole platoon of lawyers and salesmen. When Kahn took over, he wanted to shake things up. Licensing as a business has advantages and disadvantages. A huge advantage is that it's very cash-rich. The only overhead costs are people, space to put them in, and things to fill up said spaces. Leisure Concepts only had 14 employees and an office lease in 1990. A really good licensing deal can provide a substantial profit margin, such that a company the size of 4Kids didn't really need more than 1 or 2 big companies to sustain itself. The main disadvantage is that licensing companies don't own anything. They hold rights to sell parts of an intellectual property in exchange for royalties. This opens them up to the risk that a client will pull those rights and an entire revenue stream will just disappear. This did happen when Tiger Electronics, one of 4Kids' main licensors, was acquired by Mattel in 1998. Tiger was folded into Mattel and no longer needed a licensing agent. For licensing firms that focused on children's toys like 4Kids, they also had to deal with the seasonality of their business. Most revenue comes in quarter 4 during Christmas, and the rest of the year could be run at a loss. That's not a big deal so long as they're making money year over year. But it doesn't look good on quarterly reports if they have to provide to stockholders, and a missed shipment during the holiday season can tank an entire year. Kahn's vision for Leisure Concepts was to try to hedge some of this risk by making the company more vertically integrated. In 1992, he established 2 new subsidiaries, the Summit Media Group, which bought and distributed ad space for their licensors, and 4Kids Productions, which created children's TV shows, advertisements, and whatever else. Just to try to head off any confusion going forward, the company's name was changed in 1995 to 4KidsEntertainment. It was basically 3 companies in a trench coat, one of which was confusingly also called 4Kids, and all of which had separate executives to manage the day-to-day operations, but all of whom would answer to Al Kahn as the CEO. 4Kids would add more subsidiaries over time for different purposes, but Leisure Concepts, Summit Media, and 4Kids Productions represented the 3 main business segments that 4KidsEntertainment engaged in. It breaks down like this. Leisure Concepts would negotiate, buy, and sell licenses between copyright holders and people who made things. Say, for example, the United States Hot Rod Association's Monster Jam property. Summit Media would buy and sell time slots and advertising to promote the product, in this case putting commercials for Monster Jam events on local TV when it was in town. 4Kids Productions would create the content to fill said TV space. Maybe they created the commercials for Monster Jam live events. We at least know that they helped produce the 1993 weekly syndicated show Monster Wars, which led to them signing on Norman Grossfeld as the president for 4Kids Productions. 4Kids Productions might also take on other projects independent of the licensing business to bring in extra revenue, like covering the 1996 Olympic Games. Overhead naturally increased since they had to now buy equipment, film, and people. 47 as of 1997. The main business was still in lightweight license brokering, but 4Kids Productions was the linchpin in Kahn's vision of the company's future. Besides making 4Kids more appealing to licensors, it was also a way for 4Kids to start making properties that they could stake greater ownership in. The first original TV show created by 4Kids Productions was a live-action, semi-kayfabe kung fu children's show called World Martial Arts Council Masters, hereafter known as WMAC Masters.
So get real. WMAC Masters from Bandai.
The idea seems to be a combination of the Tournament of Champions premise of Mortal Kombat with the real-life interpersonal drama of Power Rangers. It's basically weekly pro wrestling, but even more choreographed and silly looking. I watched a few episodes for the sake of making this video, and as a pro wrestling fan, I got what they were going for, and I can see it working in 1995. It is still incredibly cheap looking and ridiculous. The visible health bar concept only somewhat makes diegetic sense, but is otherwise really tacky and clouds up the action. The work rate is okay, but none of the fighters really have that live show charisma. The best compliment I can give is that I can see some of the DNA in this show that eventually got put into Lucha Underground. The Gift of the Gods Championship even kinda looks like the Dragon Belt. I don't have a point here. Watch Lucha Underground. Either way, WMAC Masters didn't make it out of syndication aside from a few VHS releases, and for a reported budget of $5.5 million per season, I have a hard time believing that 4Kids made much, if any, profit off of it. Their main source of revenue for the property seems to have been a $1.6 million stake from their master toy license with Bandai, which was probably a higher value than it deserved. In 1995 and 1996, aka the 2 years when WMAC Masters was under production, 4Kids reported losses. They were fairly minor, and the licensing business tends to be cyclical, so it wasn't unexpected. When one property ages, it starts to wane in popularity. So long as you can find the next big thing, you can make it up later. When that next big thing gets old, profits go down, so you have to find the next big thing. And on, every few years. In 1997, they managed to find 2 new next big things. Their relationship with Nintendo gave them a good stroke of luck with the release of GoldenEye for the N64. In a bit of additional good fortune, 4Kids also signed a licensing deal with World Championship Wrestling. And it happened just in time to take advantage of WCW's biggest years, since they were in the middle of their peak during the NWO storyline in 1997 and Goldberg's rise to prominence in 1998. A bit of additional trivia, but 4Kids actually had the license for Vince McMahon's World Wrestling Federation a few years prior. But this new deal was happening during a time when WCW was beating the WWF in TV ratings for 82 weeks in a row. The WCW business more than doubled their licensing revenue from 1996 and put them in the black for about $740,000. It was a tremendous success. But then, at the end of 1998, 4Kids' relationship with Nintendo got them the next big thing. One that would change the fate of the company for good. In a rare departure for this channel, we're going to talk about Pokémon. The story as Al Kahn tells it is that he was in Japan in fall 1997 on unrelated business with Nintendo, saw kids lining up to buy Pokémon toys, and had to convince Nintendo to let him bring Pokémon over from Japan. Incidentally, in the same Wall Street Journal article where he made this claim, he also bragged that he could bench press 500 pounds and was the strongest employee of 4KidsEntertainment. The truth is that, while the timeline is a bit murky, we know that the Japanese distributor, Shogakukan, had been making overtures to get Pokémon overseas for a while, including a failed pitch to Saban Entertainment, best known for Power Rangers. Kahn's made some other dubious claims over the years, mainly that he came up with the name Pokémon and that 4Kids fronted money to get Pokémon overseas, neither of which are even remotely true. There are other things that 4Kids can take credit for. Norman Grossfeld did come up with the tagline "Gotta catch 'em all," and Grossfeld and Michael Hagney did write the famous Mewtwo line that everyone misattributes to Takeshi Shudo. Anyway, we're not going to talk about the Pokemon dub. There's nothing new or interesting to say about it. If you want to learn more, my guy Shapes made a video about Pokemon being Japanese, and Degas's backpack has an entire section dedicated to comparing Japanese and English episodes. You can make up your own mind about whether their dubbing practices were moral, because 4Kids was not trying to do praxis, they were trying to make money. And fuck did they ever. Pokemania is the period from 1998 to 2001 where Pokemon was culturally ubiquitous in North America. Every time I go back to Pokemania for research, I always find some new metric that blows up my understanding of how big Pokemon was. Pokemon Red, Green, Blue, and Yellow altogether sold over 40 million units. These 4 games were solely responsible for the Game Boy not dying off in the mid-1990s, and are one of the major reasons for the Game Boy Color existing. The anime was not only a hit in Japan, but it was also the #1 children's show on broadcast networks in North America. When ratings were dying for children's shows in the late 1990s, Pokemon bolstered Saturday morning viewership by 150% and weekday morning and afternoon viewership by 300%. Pokemon the First Movie is still, accounting for inflation, the highest grossing anime movie in North America. Pokemon the Movie 2000, accounting for inflation, is number 3 after Demon Slayer Infinity Castle. By May of 2000, VHS sales of episodes of the TV series had moved at least 20 million units and allowed Pioneer Home Video to take in almost 18% of the total market for non-theatrical children's home videos. When Pokemon the First Movie hit theaters, Warner Brothers offered free tickets as a call-in incentive and ended up flooding their phone lines with over 70,000 calls per minute. Burger King had to charter planes to move merchandise for their promotions for the movie. The Brazilian card manufacturer Panini had to operate at capacity 24/7 for 2 months to keep up with the stock of 61 million Pokemon cards that Brazilian children bought. Pokemon incited a whole new wave of anti-satanic pro-clutching from parents who hate fun, and anti-Asian racism from bigots who hated the fact that a Japanese company was making more money than Spider-Man. Pokemon was the most searched term on Lycos, one of the biggest search engines at the time, for 42 weeks between August 1999 and July 2000, only being knocked off for Halloween, Christmas, and Hurricane Floyd. During that tenure, it consistently beat Britney Spears, NFL, Big Brother, Survivor, NSYNC, Eminem, the Olympics, Dragon Ball, the Super Bowl, and the WWF during the height of the Attitude Era. It stayed in the top 10 consistently until September 2001, and you can take a wild guess what happened that month. 4Kids held the master license for Pokemon outside of Asia. They had no part of the video game business, but they did make the deal for Wizards of the Coast for the trading card game. When 4Kids first got WCW in 1997, they had a little over $10 million in sales. By 2000, that number multiplied up to $88 million in sales, and over $38 million of that was profit. 95% of their net revenue in 2000 was Pokemon, 39% was due to their relationship with Hasbro for the TCG, and 14% was from Warner Brothers for the anime and the movie. The rest was split between something like 500 different licenses in the US and abroad. There are more numbers, but I'm tired of them, so let's consider the effect that Pokemon had on 4Kids' trajectory aside from making them a whole lot of money. For starters, Pokemon seemed to prove Kahn's theory that 4Kids could make more money by going into the media creation business. When 4Kids Productions was established, it was a loss leader. They'd sink money into making a show because they could make back the money through licensing, or maybe cut down on costs by making commercials for ad space. Even when they first got Pokemon in 1998, the revenues from TV and film production were paltry compared to everything else. By 2000, that ratio had shifted. Licensing was still the main moneymaker, since it is, as I mentioned earlier, really cost-efficient money to be made. But now TV and film production was bringing in more revenue than the entire company made in 1997. One of the lessons that 4Kids learned was that anime was a huge, untapped market. On top of that, dubbed anime was cheap to produce. Compared to a live-action show like WMAC, the costs were minuscule. You only needed to rent time in a studio and pay for translation staff, voice actors, and directors, all of whom are notoriously underpaid compared to their live-action counterparts. Acquiring the license for foreign animation in general, but especially in Asian markets, was substantially cheaper than trying to re-syndicate something domestic. Even then, chances are, getting the license for Pokemon cost more than actually dubbing it. It's pretty well documented just how little 4Kids paid the voice actors for Pokemon. Rachel Lillis, the voice of Misty and Jessie, said that she couldn't remember most of her time working on Pokemon because she was working 2 full jobs at the time.
I'd assume you got to meet like a lot of people doing all this stuff?
I don't remember that because I was so sleep deprived. It was one time when I was working like 30 hours a week as a voice actor, on top of my 50-hour week other jobs.
That's 80 people.
That's 80.
Eric Stewart, the voice of Brock and James, famously inserted a line,
"Leo Burnett and 4Kids are the devil, Leo Burnett!"
into an episode as a prank. All because 4Kids effectively stiffed him on royalty payments for the usage of his voice in Burger King ads that paid for his health insurance.
So what really made me mad was, you are saying, we don't want you to make this money. Here's a freebie for all the work you're giving us. Thank you so much. And you can screw over the actors.
That commercial money changed my life back then.
Yeah.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah.
It was the first time I ever was able to save money. After being on a hit TV show for many years, suddenly I was able to save money.
They took the lessons from Pokemon and continued dubbing anime. The second anime that 4Kids dubbed was Tom and Friends. Like WMAC, it didn't make it out of syndication. It was likely a financial flop, but they could do 5 of those for the price of 2 seasons of WMAC. Pokemon also gave 4Kids a permanent relationship with Warner Brothers. Pokemon would become the anchor for WB's children's block, making it the only broadcast network capable of competing with Nickelodeon. Because of that, anytime 4Kids had a new property they wanted to sell on TV, it would always find a home on WB. Cubix, a South Korean CGI cartoon licensed by 4Kids, had a pretty good run for 2 years on the Kids WB block. It wasn't a huge show, but as a sophomore hit to Pokemon, it got a few games, and those all kept 4Kids' name in the papers even as Pokemania began to subside. Above and beyond all else, though, Pokemon gave 4Kids credibility to play where the big boy companies did. I'll give you one more number. In November 1999, with the release of Mewtwo Strikes Back, 4Kids hit its peak price on the stock market of about $93. If you had invested in 4Kids earlier that year, when it was trading as low as $2.42, your investment would not only have increased by 3,700%, but it would have split twice over the course of the year. Because of the attention 4Kids was getting from public investors, they transitioned from the NASDAQ index to the New York Stock Exchange, the stock market for big boy companies. Also because of this attention, 4Kids ran smack into a wall. Very, very hard.
Just give me your full name, spell it for me, please.
My name is Jenny, Jenny, Bendel, Bendel.
And the name of the company is?
Wizards of the Coast.
You're running the presses 24 hours?
Yeah, we have printers running 24 hours to make enough of the Pokemon trading card game.
Can you explain Pokemon to me?
In Q4 of 2000, Hasbro, the parent company of Wizards of the Coast, announced that it would write down $75 million in Pokemon card inventory due to over-aggressive production. A month after, Wizards of the Coast laid off over 100 employees. Hasbro was far from the only company hit by the popping of the Pokemon bubble. 4Kids also faced a crisis. Not of finance, but of confidence.
I can't take it anymore. They failed to give us credit for what Pokemon has done for the company. It's frustrating to see the price. It makes me crazy. It's not justified.
The $93 per share valuation was never sustainable, but 4Kids stock had maintained at a respectable price in the $30-ish range for over a year. Only a month after listing on the New York Stock Exchange in September 2000, that price fell from a high of $34 to a high of $17, bottoming out at about $8.50. A company's stock price isn't a one-to-one indicator of its value, but it is a pretty strong estimation of its reputation. Despite the wealth that Pokemon had provided 4Kids, the going wisdom was that the company was a fad stock. Astute financial advisors were cashing out, and a few of the more predatory types were even taking out short positions against it. Al Kahn's net value plummeted with each short sale. It's estimated that the value of his ownership in 4Kids dropped from about $110 million at its peak to $20 million. Don't cry too hard for Kahn, though. In 1999 and 2000, he made over $11 million in bonuses alone. Other stakeholders had it worse.
I don't like the way this conversation is going. I don't like giving out numbers. They're flat at this point. The position of the company is that they don't like releasing quarterly numbers because it fluctuates. It's obviously leveled off. I'm not trying to hide anything, really. It's my ass on the line.
Pokémon would still be insanely popular for the next 3 decades, but the signs were there that the peak had come and gone, and it was time to jump ship on 4Kids. Cubics wasn't going to happen, and in 2001, World Championship Wrestling was bought out by the World Wrestling Federation following the AOL Time Warner merger. 4Kids did pick up several blue-chip licenses along the way, like the American Kennel Club and other animal-themed sponsors, but AKC was never going to peak the way that WCW or Pokémon did. Kahn managed to get the Cabbage Patch Kids back on their ledger, but that was a shadow of its former glory. Yu-Gi-Oh! Was waiting in the wings to take on the mantle of Pokémon's successor, but had a bit of a slow start because it debuted a few weeks after 9/11. Yu-Gi-Oh! Would eventually become the most consistent property that 4Kids had. But if they wanted to match the mania of Pokemania, they needed more, and they needed bigger. Because the reality of being a publicly traded company is that it's always about, what have you done for me lately?
We were always a public company, but it's more like a penny stock. The stock price doubled and doubled, and we split the stock a number of times. And as institutional investors found the company and they invested in it, the pressure became a lot more about short-term earnings instead of long-term strategy.
In January 2002, 4Kids made a major pivot into the business of children's television when they leased a 4-hour block of Saturday morning TV time on Fox.
From the producers of Pokémon and Yu-Gi-Oh!, it's What's Inside the FoxBox. And here are your hosts, the stars of Spy Kids 2, Alexa Vega and Daryl Sabara.
What's inside the FoxBox?
Before diving into what would become the FoxBox, I want to give a little more context. By 2002, broadcast TV was dying, and it was dying especially quickly for children's TV. In the late 90s, cable TV was dominating the market for a number of very logical reasons. These networks not only had better shows, but they also ran all day, not just in blocks in the morning or after school. Because broadcast TV was partially subsidized by the US government, it also came with more regulations, especially around children's media. Time Warner's cable channel, Cartoon Network, could air Gundam Wing and Outlaw Star in their afternoon Toonami block. But Time Warner's broadcast channel, WB, had to remove guns from Yu-Gi-Oh! Even if they were never fired. You also couldn't air commercials for a product in the same time block as the show for that product aired. 4Kids had to censor James's collection of Pokemon cards because that could be seen as an advertisement. And you can see why that would be a problem for a toy licensor. Because of the competition and the pain-in-the-ass regulations, most broadcast networks were trying to get out of the kids' TV business. By the year 2000, pretty much all of them had given up their weekly morning blocks for more news programming, and their after-school blocks were replaced with talk shows. WB was an exception because they had Pokemon, and because they were Warner Brothers. The one exception to this decline was Saturday morning. That was kids' prime time. Broadcast networks might not be able to compete against cable in those time slots, but the ad rates for children's programming were good enough that there wasn't a better replacement. Most of the broadcast networks would run their parent company's cable programming to help bolster ratings. ABC with Disney, CBS with Nickelodeon, and WB with Cartoon Network. That put NBC and Fox at a huge disadvantage. NBC didn't have a cable channel equivalent, and Fox had just sold theirs to Disney. They couldn't justify the cost of producing new kids shows for their Saturday morning broadcasts, so they had to find someone who could. In December 2001, NBC, who had been out of the game since 1988, leased a 3-hour block on Saturday morning to Discovery for $8 million per year. Discovery would be responsible for creating or acquiring the programs to run in that time slot and sell the ad space on its own. In January 2002, Fox made a similar deal for 4 hours on Saturday mornings for $25 million a year. Beating out other bidders like Nickelodeon, Deke, Nelvana, Bandai, and Hasbro was 4KidsEntertainment, flush with cash from Pokémon. The new block, called the FoxBox, would begin airing in September 2002. The news was naturally met with some skepticism. $25 million is a ludicrous amount for broadcast time, and Discovery paid a third of that. Also, 4 hours means 8 half-hour slots. Discovery owned several cable channels with edutainment shows that could be easily reworked into kids' TV. 4Kids had Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh! And Cubics, all of which were stuck on Kids WB, and then Tama and Friends and Whack Masters, which no one really wanted. 4Kids needed to build up a back catalog, and the only way to do that was to go ham on producing shows of uncertain value. The initial block consisted of Stargate Infinity, Ultraman Taiga, Kirby Right Back At Ya, Ultimate Muscle, and Fighting Foodons, which I have since discovered was originally called Food Feud. Food Feud. Try saying that 3 times really fast. Food Feud, Feud Feud, Feud Feud. Fuck you. I'm sure you can do it, but suck my dick anyway. That's 5 shows. They had 8 slots to fill, meaning 3 of them were just reruns. It wasn't a good start, and at $25 million a year, the FoxBox could not make money. Summit Media Group, their media buying segment, was never profitable again. Al Kahn justified the purchase by saying that licensing was still their most important segment and TV time was a good way to give their brands exposure. 4Kids also began selling internet ad space on FoxBox.tv to advertisers who would buy in. That would have been a good idea 2 years prior or 2 years in the future. But the main problem they would run into is that TV is also a seasonal business. They needed new programming constantly unless they wanted to burn through their existing catalog. To keep the FoxBox working, 4Kids needed to keep getting shows, and they needed to get them at a fast enough pace to rotate their shows out. By mid-2003, Whack Masters made it onto the FoxBox, and it could be that they just really wanted to make Whack Masters happen again, but chances are they just needed a show. People who grew up with the FoxBox might push back and talk about how they fondly remember Shaman King or Sonic X or maybe the dub of One Piece. Probably not. If you're a Cramp Twins fan, I don't know what to tell you. Go away. Only one show seems to have actually made them money, and that was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which debuted in April 2003. The year before, 4Kids was given the contract as TMNT's worldwide licensing agent. Thriving off of nostalgia from the late 80s and early 90s, TMNT would rise again as a premier children's property. And unlike with Pokémon, 4Kids owned a piece of the pie. As co-owners and co-producers of the new cartoon, not only did they get the fees from selling ads, but they got a good chunk of the ad revenue itself, as well as all the different toys and merchandise they could sell. Coming out of 2003, TMNT and Yu-Gi-Oh! Were the two best licenses that 4Kids would sign until their bankruptcy. Over the next 3 years, the two of them would account for anywhere from 37 to 55% of 4Kids' total revenue. They proved that 4Kids was not a one-trick pony, and gave them stability to expand their television business and avoid a complete post-Pokemania crash. But to stay afloat in the kids' TV business, 4Kids needed more. More shows, more properties, more of everything. With all of that came another pivot, and more friction.
Next week, something's happening to the FoxBox, and things will never be the same. Miss it, and you'll miss everything. The FoxBox is now 4Kids TV.
We're 4Kids.
So, for action.
By 2004, 4Kids had grown from being a lightweight merchandise licensor to being a television production company, a home video distributor, a record label, a website creator, and probably something else I'm forgetting. When Al Kahn started as CEO, all they did was make deals. Now they were involved in every step of the production process. As the early aughts turned into the mid-aughts, Kahn started publicly using a phrase that I think captures the evolution of the company. 4Kids was no longer just a production company. It was a portable brand.
If I can make 4Kids TV a portable brand, which means it can be imported into multiple places, whether it be MSOs, whether it be cable, whether it be satellite TV, what is the value of that platform?
Ever since the debut of the FoxBox, their revenue went through the roof. In 2003 and 2004, they had over $100 million in sales. Even with Pokémon in a recession between Yu-Gi-Oh!, TMNT, the FoxBox shows, and all of their major properties being re-aired on Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network, 4Kids was doing gangbusters on TV and in merchandise sales. The problem is, their overhead costs exploded. They had more than doubled their employee headcount between 2000 and 2004, with most of that growth happening in the latter 2 years. They needed all of this labor to maintain their new internal studio, which, according to 4Kids production president Norman Grossfeld, would be a 24/7 operation. The higher sales and higher overhead ultimately canceled each other out because since 2000, 4Kids' profit margin had decreased every year. This demonstrated a critical flaw in their strategy because it's counterintuitive to how a licensing business is actually run. They're meant to be low overhead and low risk with moderate sales, leading to higher margins. Kahn was steering the company in such a way that they were jettisoning all the competitive advantages of being a licensing company in pursuit of the benefits of being a media company, none of which had actually materialized. This is exactly the mistake that Kahn saw Coleco make in the 1980s after the success of the Cabbage Patch Kids, one that he said he was trying to avoid. The actual dollar amount of profit didn't shrink much though. As long as you're making money rather than losing, it doesn't matter that the proportion of money made is less over time. The answer is yes, because 4Kids was a publicly traded company, and publicly traded companies have these annoying little things called investors.
Do you think you've got a shot at having equal Yu-Gi-Oh! Licensing revenues in Q4 of 2004 as you did in Q4 of 2003?
A shot.
You've got a shot at it.
A shot, but I wouldn't.
Yeah, okay. You got a shot.
A shot, but I certainly wouldn't.
No, I hear you. That's cool.
Now, it is not true that corporations are owned by their stockholders. That is a myth started in the 1970s by the same minds that brought you Reaganomics and all the bullshit that came with that. But CEOs do have to report to investors every quarter, and stockholders are more than willing to ask difficult questions and give unsolicited advice. For example, when Kahn wanted to buy in on Winx Club, Magical Do-Re-Mi, and Mew Mew Power to try to steal the girls' demo from Nickelodeon, one investor asked a very reasonable question that Kahn was not able to answer.
I want to ask about the Winx Club. You've got 2 cartoons that are lined up on Saturday more for girls than a boy, which is a departure from your action figures and your action-oriented content primarily for boys. What kind of early licensing interests are you getting on Winx as different or the same than what you would get in the earlier stages of the Turtles or way back with the Pokémon?
Well, it's funny. You know, I don't necessarily think there is departure. I think the similarity between a Winx Club and the other shows we run is that they are action adventures. The only difference is that the stars of the shows happen to be girls. But they are not necessarily girly shows in a sense. They're not about cooking. They're not about cooking.
The stockholders were noticeably crabby around this time. When people invest in a company, they want to make more money than they put in. Stocks don't generate interest, so investors make money by selling their stock when the price is high. The price only goes up if key performance indicators like earnings per share or price-book ratios also go up. Companies whose stock price tends to be pretty stable can make investors happy by doing things like paying dividends. But 4Kids never did that. They would do stock buybacks, but never at a price that would satisfy someone who bought in after 1999. Kahn, being a marketing guy primarily, was not good at explaining why.
Obviously during the quarter you repurchased stock, but you kind of said the average price was 19, yet management remains committed to continuing the repurchase plan. I'm curious, is it safe to say that 19 is kind of the floor level that you're putting on the stock, given that through most of the quarter it traded significantly above that?
No, I don't think we have any preordained notion of what a floor is.
So here's the main problem. 4Kids was positioned well to compete with other licensing companies and smaller kid media studios like Saban or Nelvana. Kahn wanted 4Kids to take on big children's networks with their own production studios and distribution networks like Nickelodeon, Cartoon Network, or Disney. With only 4 hours on Fox and the dedicated spots on Kids WB for Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh!, they just didn't have the platform to compete in that arena. But Kahn had a solution. Make 4Kids into a portable brand.
The world is going to be platformed. That's no question about it. I mean, look at Microsoft spending billions of dollars to introduce a new Xbox, or Sony spending billions of dollars to introduce the PSP, or Nintendo spending billions of dollars for new game systems. These systems are platforms. The iPod is a platform, while 4Kids TV is a platform. And that the more we can establish it, and the more portable it becomes, the more value it's going to be attained to those websites.
Old heads in the audience might remember the Game Boy Advance video cartridges. These were a 4Kids invention. They patented the technology and compression algorithm to put full-length episodes of Pokémon, Sonic X, and other shows onto cartridges so kids could watch them on their GBAs. They licensed the tech out to Majesco, and they eventually developed cartridges for Nickelodeon and Disney properties, as well as Dragon Ball GT. It's a fun idea, but the tech is limited to what the GBA could muster, and that wasn't a lot. Phones would do the exact same thing in a few years, and without the GBA's awful sound compression. This is not a good way to watch Sonic X, and my phone lets me argue with teenagers on the internet anyway, so 4Kids also co-funded a separate handheld device called the Mattel Juice Box, and it didn't work out well either. Fun fact, one of the few things that made it onto the Mattel Juice Box was a documentary about professional wrestler Chris Benoit. You know, for the kids. Snark aside, I have to give Kahn some major kudos here. He was a huge proponent of moving 4Kids onto internet platforms. He read in a paper once that kids were doing homework while listening to music or watching videos online, and he basically decided that if kids were increasingly using the internet, then 4Kids needed to be there. The company had been making websites and technology concepts since the late 90s, but those were almost negligible to their bottom line. Now they were making massive investments into their AOL Kids site and developing streaming services for the shows that they had that weren't already on TV. This was a good idea. It was extremely forward-thinking, aside from the AOL part. But building a tech platform is also extremely expensive, and 4Kids would find out how expensive a few years later. In 2005, 4Kids spent a lot of money to rebrand the FoxBox to 4Kids TV as part of the portable branding initiative. Also in 2005, 4Kids hit their first reversal. Their sales were only $86 million and their profit dropped to $5 million. Most of this decline was due to the fact that Yu-Gi-Oh! Was pushing 4 years old, and the 4Kids co-produced motion picture was a flop. TMNT's cartoon also ended, and the next series, Turtles Fast Forward, was still in production. Kids naturally have a short attention span, and 4Kids didn't have a successor to the successor of Pokemon yet. Stock prices on average fell accordingly, and shareholders were not happy, to say the least.
Going back to your opening remarks, all sounds very nice regarding the shows, but we're in no position to evaluate the quality or the success or failure of the shows. We leave that to you, of course. You're the management. But we are in a position to evaluate you and the management, and so far you've delivered promises of great shows, but no shows in terms of net income. Unfortunately, this has been the case for years now. It's been your theme song. How many more years do you feel shareholders should reasonably continue to be patient and accept to permit this song to be sung without material management changes?
Kahn's response was kind of a jumbled mess, but he emphasized that 4Kids was going full throttle on increasing the types of revenue streams the company could provide, and attacking any platforms that the company could muster. All of that work of making a portable brand, he assured them, was building up to something.
These are the types of things that the management team is concentrating on as we move forward. Because you're right. If we just stay in the licensing business and we get a hit, we get a mess, we get this and we get that, the results stay fairly constant. Which is actually pretty amazing, considering the volatility of the business. But it doesn't certainly help us as a public company. You have to understand that we've undertaken many new situations. We've lost a lot of money on 4Kids TV. We have lost probably a substantial amount of money if you look at just our earnings. But we have built something that you can't buy. We've built a platform that as we move forward, that platform will pay for itself.
In the game, play it strong. Play it with style. Play it fast.
In 2006, 4Kids lost the Pokémon license. That was a long time coming and probably had little to do with 4Kids itself. Pokémon had been consolidating its properties under one corporate umbrella, naturally trying to control everything and reap the most revenue from it. Norman Grossfeld, the president of 4Kids Productions, said that the creation of the Pokémon Company USA in 2002 was a telltale sign that they were on the outs. In that same year, 4Kids was forced to accept a lower commission on sales in exchange for extending the license, but that was only buying time. Grossfeld still hoped that, since 4Kids had been instrumental in selling the anime to the American market, they could at least retain the dub. They didn't, for what seemed to be budgetary reasons. 4Kids simply cost too much money, and TPC could get the dub done cheaper by going down the street and using a studio that would hire kids right out of high school to dub Pokemon instead. I want to be very clear here. Whether or not you hate 4Kids, the Pokemon Company are not the good guys in this scenario. Losing the Pokemon license did not ruin 4Kids. Pokemon hadn't been one of their major contributors for 2 years at that point. But in 2006, coincidentally, the company had its first unprofitable year since 1996. The shortfall was relatively minor in the scheme of things, about $1 million. But as a sign of the times, they also closed down Summit Media Group, their subsidiary responsible for the media planning business. It was mostly a method to reduce overhead, which in media planning pretty much just means layoffs. If 4Kids still had Pokemon, chances are they would have been profitable, if only a little. The main culprit in 4Kids' unprofitable year was just that sales were down. In addition to Yu-Gi-Oh! And TMNT's decline over time and Pokemon's emancipation, Nintendo dropped 4Kids as their toy licensor, ending a relationship that had been in place since the 1980s. Meanwhile, 4Kids TV was bogged down by the same shows that they had had for years. By the time Yu-Gi-Oh! Made it to Fox, it had already been run ragged on Kids WB and Cartoon Network. The best new show they aired in 2006 was Viva Pinata, which was a co-production with Microsoft to sell the Viva Pinata video game. By 2007, Viva Pinata was dead in the water. There's nothing wrong with the show, but a kids game on the Xbox 360 had a natural ceiling. Also, and this isn't anything 4Kids did or could do anything about, but there was a rising outrage against advertisements for foods and candy that targeted kids, because those advertisements had rightfully been linked with childhood obesity. The outrage caused a massive downspike in ad rates for children's TV because there were significantly fewer buyers now. WB ended its weekday kids time slots, the same ones that still ran Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! Nearly every day. So it didn't actually matter if the shows on 4Kids TV were good because no one was paying for them anymore. Honestly, it's kind of a minor miracle that 4Kids was only down by $1 million in 2006. But the story of 4Kids in 2006 and 2007 is the story of chaotic, and a very poorly thought out transition to making 4Kids a gaming company.
We're going to rebrand our network starting in September, and talk about it as Where Games Begin. Because every show on 4Kids TV, starting in September, will be a game-based show that's either based on a trading card game or a video game. The idea is obvious. We'll have a point of difference from Nickelodeon and Cartoon, and all of the advertisers are looking to reach that gamer universe of an option of going to 4Kids TV or 4Kids.tv to advertise games, to advertise, obviously, anything that relates to the gamer market.
Chaotic was a Danish trading card game that, according to Alcon, sold about $53 million worth of cards. 4Kids purchased Chaotic, the entire business, from card sales to distribution to IP, and split the rights with Chaotic Entertainment USA to create a few shell subsidiaries whose only job was creating and promoting Chaotic. Kahn's logic was that Denmark was a small country, and if Chaotic was an equal hit in North America, it would be unfathomably profitable. More importantly, by owning all of Chaotic, 4Kids would not be caught in the same situation they were in with Pokémon. By owning Chaotic, 4Kids would get the whole thing. Forever. Chaotic was an abject failure, but there is a small, very dedicated fan base still around, and to acknowledge their side, I want to say that Chaotic sounds like a good concept. I'm not a trading card guy, and I don't know the gameplay pitfalls that it might have had, but in 2006 it would have been a cutting-edge idea. A whole community or competitive scene based around a single website, where you can interact with other players, trade cards, battle, or just shoot the shit? Yeah, I dig it. The monster designs and the lore of Chaotic, based on what I've gleaned from various wikis, are also pretty cool. I can see why there was some hype for this game when it came out.
Let's get chaotic! Let's get chaotic! Let's get chaotic! Chaotic!
Unfortunately, for however cool a concept it was, Chaotic was a victim of bad timing and horrible execution on the part of 4KidsEntertainment. October 7th, 2006. The Chaotic cartoon debuted on 4Kids TV, formerly known as the FoxBox. The cartoon is fine. It looks like shit compared to the stuff 4Kids was importing, but at least they outsourced it to Korea for Season 2, so it looks better there. I have no strong feelings about the story other than that I learned nothing about how to play the game, but in their defense, I wasn't trying very hard either. The meanest thing I can say is that Chaotic might have the only bad 4Kids opening theme. But the first episode establishes the world and idea of Chaotic. It's a place in the computer where geeks of the game can hang out and play the game. It is undoubtedly a fantasy that would have appealed to me as a teenager, so even if the cartoon is mid, it does sell me on the concept of Chaotic and the online space that 4Kids would create for it. For a toy commercial cartoon, that's all it needs to do. Unfortunately, as of the cartoon's debut, there was no product. After you watched the Chaotic premiere, you couldn't beg your parents to take you to Walmart to buy Chaotic cards. If you went onto chaoticgame.com and entered their quasi-ARG password, you would gain access to a limited flash portal of a site that was still woefully under construction. The forum didn't exist yet, so there was no community to speak of. Maybe this would have been fine in the short term. You know, build intrigue and then capitalize on the market with a big release. Maybe 2 weeks later, on October 21st, when the second episode aired, or January 20th, 2007, when the show began airing weekly. Even the earliest cited release dates of spring 2007, 6 to 8 weeks after the January run, or February or March would have made sense. But Chaotic didn't actually hit shelves until October 24th, 2007. 4Kids didn't sell the goddamned game for over a year after the launch, and only in limited distributions to comics and hobby shops. The website, the other half of the game, was still in beta and barely functional enough to run 1v1 games. Also, if you were a fan of the cartoon and didn't really care about the game, then you still couldn't buy action figures or merchandise of the characters because 4Kids just decided not to license it to toy companies until 2009 for some reason. Yeah, that's right, the licensing company decided not to license their product. What the fuck? But finally, by January 2008, the website was functional and the game was in stores and they were finally making sales. Maybe.
We're in every Walmart store according to Walmart. I think it's 4,200 Walmart stores. We've been told that Walmart is putting us in every store.
Do you know when that hit? We had trouble finding them in Walmart.
Oh, they've been selling. If you look at the time rate of sales, they've been going very, very quickly.
We didn't have trouble finding them because they were sold out. It was because they didn't get any.
It's possible. We expect that during the fourth quarter of 2008, right now, by the end of the quarter, should be in stores.
Okay.
In spite of everything, the future looked promising. 330,000 people signed up for the Chaotic website, and their limited shipments to hobby and comic stores sold through. 4Kids spent about $11 million just on the TCG distribution segment of their company in 2006 and 2007, and who knows how much on the cartoon and website. But if Alcon was right, and they hit a projected $20 to $30 million in sales for that year, then they could get slightly ahead of the game.
I am pleased to report, though, that based on our projections, I expect the company to be profitable in the fourth quarter of 08.
His projections had Chaotic selling $7 million in quarter 4 of 2008. Chaotic sold about $500,000. In 2008, 4Kids lost almost $37 million over all 4 business segments. The Chaotic website and TV show were also a wash. For the first time ever, they went into the negative on the licensing business. I don't even know what they fucked up that time, but I assume it's because they didn't acquire anything new because they were too busy not selling Chaotic. Hey, remember when 4Kids bought time from Fox for an absurd amount of money each year and never profited from it? Well, in 2007, Warner Brothers was ready to get rid of its Kids WB block because without Pokémon or Yu-Gi-Oh!, they weren't making any money. So they did what Fox did and leased a time slot to 4Kids, who, despite being so far in the hole, decided to buy in and rename Kids WB to the CW4Kids. And despite being the newer thing, Chaotic was not just running on 4Kids TV and the CW4Kids, but also on Disney Channel's Jetix block. 4Kids had nothing new, just Chaotic, and Chaotic was bleeding out in the snow. But that didn't stop Kahn from being a professional hype man.
I also believe that, assuming reasonable worldwide economic conditions, the company will be profitable for the total of 09.
Anyone over a certain age knows where this story is headed.
Lehman Brothers is going bankrupt, and financial markets from Asia to Europe are doing their utmost to prevent Monday from turning from dark to black.
As we get deep into 2008 and 2009, I want to make it very clear that Chaotic did not kill 4Kids by itself. It did fuck their momentum, and it did cost an obscene amount of money that was never recovered. But just like in Monopoly, you can land on Boardwalk and lose your ass, but so long as you have cash, you're still in the game. And the one huge advantage that 4Kids always had as a licensing business was that they had a lot of cash. They could have eaten shit on Chaotic and made it out okay. They'd done that before in 1996. But at the same time that they were eating shit on Chaotic, they were eating shit on the cash front too, and I can't even say it was their fault. So forewarning, this part isn't going to be fun. We're not talking about anime or dubbing or funny Kahn flubs. We're going to be talking about finance, and specifically the type of finance that gets you pulled into congressional hearings. It will get heady, and I'm very sorry, but it is the most important thing. Until 2005, 4Kids kept most of their ready cash in bank accounts. At any point, if they needed to use money, they could withdraw funds and spend them. Despite the flexibility, this arrangement actually isn't ideal. Savings accounts don't pay well, and having too much cash on hand signals to shareholders that cash isn't being effectively deployed in more productive investments. 4Kids wasn't really prepared to be an institutional investor, though. Their chief financial officers had historically been accountants, not investment people. While they did have some money in the market, it was usually deployed in commercial paper and money market funds, highly conservative and low-yield debt securities. But because of increasing pressure from shareholders to use their cash or pay them dividends, which 4Kids didn't want to do, in 2005 they opened an account with Lehman Brothers, best known as the Bank of Evil from Despicable Me. Lehman Brothers then took 4Kids' cash and invested it in highly toxic auction-rate securities.
There is still one major market that continues to be locked up, however. I'm talking about auction-rate securities. 18 months after investment banks quit supporting the securities, more than 400 companies are stuck with $22 billion worth of the debt. And according to the New York brokerage firm Second Market, the securities are selling at losses of as much as 40 cents on the dollar.
So in a very basic, dumb bitch baby security, you're buying either ownership in something or debt. We're more interested in debt securities, things like treasury bonds. The concept is simple. You're buying an IOU from the government or a company, and in exchange, they pay interest to you on top of making good when the debt matures. Short-term investments like what 4Kids normally did usually don't get traded because they mature so quickly that even though the cash value isn't readily available like it would be in a bank account, for accounting purposes it basically still is. The trade-off is that compared to longer-term investments, you make less money because, even ignoring interest, if you hold on to an asset for a while, chances are the sale price will be higher because, in the long term, that's generally how the market trends. Auction-rate securities are long-term investments that cosplay as short-term ones. They have long maturity periods, upwards of 20 to 30 years, or even in perpetuity. But every 35 days or so, there are market auctions held to exchange the securities where the going interest rates are reset. In a healthy security market, you can effectively buy low and sell high every month. The problem is that the auctions are the only way to trade auction rate securities. If there aren't as many buyers as there are sellers, then the entire auction fails. If an auction fails, no trades happen and you have to wait for the next one. And if all the auctions fail, then you're left to wait it out until the security matures, if it ever does. In early 2007, global financial markets became increasingly illiquid. Savvy investors were already predicting the collapse of the US housing market and began pulling funds from exchanges in order to protect their positions. Trillions of dollars evaporated over the next year and a half as large-scale waves of defaulting mortgages put banks in the red, causing the Great Recession. 4Kids' portfolio up to 2005 usually included about 10 to 30 million in short-term investments. By end of year 2006, they had about $93 million put into auction-rate securities. 4Kids' first failed auction happened in August 2007. Then CFO Bruce R. Foster was bewildered, but not really concerned. By February 2008, auctions failed more often than they completed. To make matters worse, many of the security holders stopped paying interest because that's just a thing that can happen apparently. It's hard to calculate how much money 4Kids lost, because over the next few years, they continued writing things off, taking on impairment charges or shifting items into non-current asset categories for tax and accounting purposes. But we can tell that in 2007, they redeemed about $10 million of their $93 million of auction-rate securities, and in 2008, they redeemed a little under $15 million, putting them together at about $68 million. In their Quarter 1 investors call in 2008, the company claimed to have about $52 million in auction-rate securities that they wrote down to $39 million. Whatever the number was, they were just stuck with it because they couldn't be sold. Most of the securities had no maturity date, and interest was no longer being collected. So it doesn't matter if the face value was $68 million, $52 million, or $39 million, because the real value was zero. Al Kahn put the blame for the auction-rate security fiasco solely on the head of Lehman Brothers. He was right to do so. Lehman Brothers was scum. They were one of the main perpetrators of the hyper-aggressive mortgage-backed securities that caused the 2008 financial crisis. They were one of the few banks whose debt was so pervasive that they actually went under. Neither the US government nor the private sector bailed them out. When Al Kahn said that Lehman Brothers misrepresented what auction-rate securities were and what they did, I believe him because that's what they did to everyone else.
It would have required an $85 billion subsidy to keep afloat. Overall, I estimate it's going to cost at least $400 billion if you wanted to bail out the whole bunch. They're certainly not worth it. It's better to let them fail.
It wouldn't be until 2011 that 4Kids would settle with Lehman Brothers, and by that point, 4Kids was filing for bankruptcy. I'm skipping ahead a bit to the end because at this point things just get sadder and sadder. As the economy began to recover in 2009, 4Kids' position didn't. It just couldn't. Their TV blocks were stale, they had no new properties, and the one thing they had invested heavily in was bleeding them dry. In 2008, they terminated their agreement with Fox, ending the 4Kids TV block. They tried running an all-anime streaming service called Toonzaki, but it's not even worth a footnote. The entire trading card game segment was taken out back and shot in 2010 because it cost them another $20 million loss. In 2009, Nickelodeon's parent company, Viacom, bought out the rights to TMNT from 4Kids and Mirage, so one of their best-performing licenses was just gone. It certainly didn't help matters that both Konami, the owners of Yu-Gi-Oh!, and the Pokémon Company, the owners of Pokémon, sued 4Kids over accounting discrepancies and royalty payments. Pre-2008, that sort of thing would have been the cost of doing business. Lawsuits like that happen, and it wouldn't have made a big difference in the bottom line. In 2010, though, that was their bottom line. Going into 2011, the company was worthless. 4Kids was trading at below $2 until they were delisted from the New York Stock Exchange entirely. Their cash balance was decimated and their revenue streams were anemic. They had cut their workforce almost in half and had to give up their long-standing headquarters on the Avenue of the Americas in New York City. In April 2011, 4KidsEntertainment filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. They would be back, but that was the end of the company that we're interested in.
We have a promising new pipeline of properties. As I mentioned, a minimum of 12 will be available to start selling and hopefully garnering some revenues. If we can get meaningful revenue contributions from just one or more of these new properties and generate profits from the network and internet advertising, the company should and will again return to profitability. Again, I want to thank all of the shareholders who've stood by the company during these incredibly difficult years, and I now entertain any questions.
There are no questions at this time.
Okay. I want to thank you for your participation in this call.
4Kids' story after 2011 isn't really interesting, so we'll go through it quickly. After the bankruptcy, 4Kids rebranded as 4 Licensing and went back to what they knew best: simple licensing, without all the TV bells and whistles. 4 Licensing wasn't successful either. They had some new toy that brought some money in, but by 2015 they were already closing doors. The parts of 4Kids we care about were sold off during the reorganization. The programming block on CW was sold to Saban Entertainment and rebranded as Vortex, where they now hosted mostly 4Kids shit. 4Kids Productions was sold to Konami, who rebranded the studio as Konami Cross Media NY and used it to make the dub for Yu-Gi-Oh! The Chaotic website limped along until 2012. The only reason I know it lasted that long is because that's when YouTube videos of kids asking what happened to it started popping up. The other copyright holders of Chaotic have made a few overtures over the years saying that it would make a comeback. For the fans who still hang on for good news, I hope they get it. Finally, much to the chagrin of his haters, Kahn is still alive at the age of 79. After stepping down as chairman and CEO in 2011, he returned to his home neighborhood in Brooklyn. There, he is very active in the community, having started and chaired on the boards of several charities aimed at helping children in New York, especially those with cancer, learning disorders, or parents in law enforcement. After leaving 4Kids, Kahn founded another kid business that is still around as Kidtagious. They have not created or licensed anything that anyone who is old enough to find this video engaging has ever heard of. As of the making of this video, Kahn is the chief marketing officer for VV and Ecomi, a pair of crypto companies dedicated to making NFTs from comic books and children's toys. No one who's watched up to this point will find this news shocking. 4Kids' fall from grace is not your typical bankruptcy story. They didn't go out of business because their service was bad, or because they had shitified their product, or because they began pricing themselves out of the market. Look, I'm not going to argue that the One Piece stuff isn't bad, but they never hemorrhaged money off of One Piece. So why did they hemorrhage money to begin with? Timing was the biggest factor. The 2008 recession destroyed the global economy, and with it, consumer confidence. 4Kids, always a company that relied on people consuming, was never going to make it out unscathed. But they probably could have survived 2008 if it hadn't been for Chaotic, and they likely could have survived Chaotic if it hadn't been for 2008. The fact that they happened at the same time was just too much. Timing also screwed them on their good ideas. Online TCGs like Chaotic have thrived since 2008. The Pokémon TCG is now in an app. If they survived a couple years later, they could have put their entire catalog on Netflix, and 4Kids would have thrived in that type of marketplace. Unfortunately, they also kept doubling down on old ideas. Television was going away. They were only a few years away from Minecraft YouTubers getting more viewership than the entire CW lineup. There was no reason to spend tens of millions on broadcast TV in 2008 like they did. As a CEO, Kahn had one foot in the past and one in the future. Because of that, it was never clear what he wanted 4Kids to be. He was always trying to make it something else. A production company, a TV network, whatever the hell a portable brand was, a trading card distributor. Every time they pivoted, they had to spend more money to enter a new industry. By the end, they were a licensing company with millions worth of inventory. How do you let that happen? That does beg the eternal question of whether or not Kahn deserves the blame for what happened to 4Kids. The answer is yes. He was the CEO, it was his job to manage the company and take responsibility for management decisions. That is why CEOs get paid enough to, say, buy the former penthouse of Bernie Madoff, while the stars of their most popular show work 3 jobs. I don't think we should vandalize his Wikipedia page with Die Anime Nazi, but the teens on Toonzone were right that Kahn didn't quite understand his own product. There are many examples people have compiled over the years, but the one that sticks out to me is when he said of the main characters of Magical Doremi that the designs are pretty so they appeal to girls, but the characters are very sexy so the boys like them. These are the main characters of Doremi. Why would you say that? I don't think it's true that losing Pokemon ruined 4Kids, but I do think that Kahn was obsessed with trying to recreate the conditions for Pokemon. Did Yu-Gi-Oh! Need or benefit from having a movie? Did anyone care about Capsule Monsters? No, but Pokemon had a movie, and Capsule Monsters was basically Yu-Gi-Oh! But Pokemon. So, let's throw some money at it. Over the years, Kahn has complained that 4Kids didn't get the credit they were due for Pokemon's success. That is fair to some extent, because what the Pokémon Company did to its American partners was bastard behavior. That being said, who in 4Kids is he complaining about not getting credit? Kahn got his credit when he made 8 figures off the backs of underpaid directors and voice actors. The fans don't credit him for anything, and for good reason. He didn't do anything worth crediting. His one contribution to Pokemon was adding the accent over the E, and anyone who's had to type out the word Pokemon probably resents him for that. But you know who the fans do credit? The people who worked on the show. Veronica Taylor is still considered the iconic voice of Ash Ketchum 20 years after she was booted from the show. She, Eric Stewart, and Tara Sands, and the rest of the crew still go to conventions where fans tell them how much their performances changed their lives. When it was announced that Rachel Lillis was going into hospice care, fans eagerly donated to her GoFundMe, and after she passed, fans paid to memorialize her with a bench in Central Park. Kahn gets his kudos from Zoom podcasters who use the word innovation like punctuation. If he wants a bench in Central Park, he can pay for it himself. But in spite of all that, I'm still human, and I'll give him this. It's pretty sad at times to read old quarterly earnings calls and hear Kahn talk to a dwindling number of investors until there were none. All of the people who nurtured his ego over the years just disappeared when the money was gone. I can't imagine a greater nightmare for a guy who wanted recognition as an inventor, and I can hardly imagine a more fitting punishment for a man who was given a fortune and then squandered it. Hello to everyone who has made it this far in the video, and thank you for making it this far into the video. I'd like to give a quick thanks to all the voice actors that helped put this video together. Their names are scrolling across the screen now, their socials and whatever else are in the description. I'd like to give a very special, pointed thanks to my channel collaborator Quizguru, who is an actual accountant and who helped check some of my work, not all of it, so that I didn't make quite as big an ass out of myself as I'm sure that I did at some point. Please subscribe if you'd like more. This is a channel that has been largely dedicated to in-depth videos on the Pokemon anime. I'd like to recommend Frame by Frame, Quiz's episode-by-episode look into the Kanto season of the Pokemon anime. And if you're in the mood for more nostalgia and good vibes, then I'd also like to recommend my video on the early Pokemon internet fandom, Pokeweb 1.0. That's all for now. This has been Truth or Deal by Inara.